Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 9th of November 2022. Coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7RP. Lovely to see you. On tonight's show, Kevan N4XL joins us to explain takeoff angles and high frequency terrain assessment. Just how ingenious can you get to view a solar eclipse? And we find out what on earth this is. Just time to enter on BATC or Facebook if you haven't already entered. We've had some entries, but if you think you know what that is, let us know in the next couple of minutes and we'll include your entry. But first, some club news. And Malcolm G3PDH writes to us to tell us that NARC has had another good win on SSB in the autumn series, resulting in an overall lead of nearly 18,000 points. This means that so far we've won each individual contest session with only one still to be adjudicated and two left to finish the series by the end of November. Of particular note was that Andy M0NKR won the 100 watt section and Peter M0RYB the 10 watt section. So well done to them and also everyone else who took part, and thank you for the points. Now a note about the Koblenz sked, which we normally have on this coming Saturday traditionally, but it's going to be rescheduled because we're starting a CW workshop boot camp, and that means many of the people who take part in that net are not going to be available. So we're postponing it and we'll let you know the date as soon as we hear from our friends in Koblenz in Germany. So look out on the newsletter and on the website, and also next week at the club I'll mention it as well if we've got the date by then. Now, and also just a bit of news that we talked about last time we were here on NARC Live. We mentioned that we were running our first foundation course for 2 years. I'm pleased to say that we've got 9 candidates who are going to be taking that this coming Saturday, the 12th, and the following Saturday, and including some exams. Some people are going to take the exam on the following Saturday, and some people are going to take it in their own time at home afterwards, which of course is now allowed as well. So good luck to all of those, and thanks very much to the training team for all their hard work and support, because the curriculum and the syllabus has changed so much in the last 2.5 years to include things like ICNIRP and also SDRs and switch mode power supplies and things like that. Even at foundation level there's a light touch on those. So thanks to everybody who got together, and I'm really pleased that we're going to be running a course to bring newcomers into our hobby. Now, news of our Christmas dinner party. Hopefully you've seen this on the newsletter. We've never talked about it yet on NARC Live, so here's some details for you. It is on the Wednesday the 14th of December at 7 o'clock, and it's at the Village Inn pub and restaurant in Little Melton. Now they have a special festive menu which is normally £13.50, but the club is going to subsidise that. We all realise the cost of living increases for all of us. And so the club has got reasonable funds because our costs have been relatively low. So we're going to subsidise that to £10 a head. And that is for NARC members and also family or friends who can come along as well. The booking form is on the website. You'll also find it on recent newsletters. Or if you want a physical piece of paper to fill in, you'll be able to get that at CNS meetings and pay there and then in cash if you wish. Otherwise it's payment by backs, please. So there are the details for our Christmas dinner party. As I said, you can find out details on our website. And also, although it seems a long way away, you need to make the booking along with your choice of food for that 3-course meal by the end of November. That is the deadline. The 30th of November is the deadline. So plenty of time, but don't let it run away with you. If you want to come to that, please let us know as soon as possible. The other thing is, I don't think this would happen, but we have got a private room and there's a limit to the number of people there. So if we did get a lot of people, it's possible we'd have to stop taking bookings. So do it soon. And it helps Mark and I as well. Mark is our treasurer and it helps me. I'm organising the event and Mark's taking all the money and things. It really does help us. And while talking about paying money to the club as well, just to mention that our membership has now been set for 2023. And as I've mentioned at the club when we've met in person, and I'll mention here on NARC Live for the first time, the committee sat and deliberated quite a lot. We've now got a record membership. The club has never had over 200 paid members as we have. The membership was set at £5 last year because at the beginning of last year, of course, we still weren't meeting and we couldn't see when we were going to. Now, we can't afford to sustain the £5, but we believe that we can sustain a lower rate than our usual £20 to £30, which was the full membership fee pre-COVID, because of the number of people that we've got. We have fixed costs, mainly, and most of our costs, apart from affiliation to the RSGB and insurances, most of our costs are tied up with hiring the school, as you'd expect. But because we're meeting only every other week, and if most members who are members in this year join next year, we believe we can sustain a rate of just £10 for full membership for the full year. It's never ever been that low, or at least Roger tells me that it was probably that in the 80s. I certainly don't remember back then. I was just alive. I was just born. But anyway, so seriously, it's £10 for the whole year, and we would love you to pay your membership as soon as possible, because we do have costs incurred. You can find details on the website. If you're already a NARC member, you don't need to fill in any membership form. You just need to pay us into our bank, ideally by BATC, using your call sign and the word MEM on there, so that Mark can tally it and make sure you're not paying for dinner or whatever, a dinner party. If you'd rather do it the old-fashioned way with some cash, that's fine, and do that at a club meeting. We're meeting, for example, next Wednesday, and you can do it there and pay by that, and we'll give you a receipt as well. I hope that makes sense. If you've got any queries on it, as always, you can just drop me an email and I'll let you know. But that's £10 for the full year's membership next year. We haven't had much club news from people this year, but just this month. When we last met, we were Tammy was telling you about a solar eclipse which was about to happen, and we did have someone send us some pictures. So firstly, can we have a look at this, Tammy? Now this was pictures from Peter M0VRA. By the way, the solar eclipse was actually on the 25th of October, just a couple of days after our meeting online. And this is his setup. Now look at that. Have a good look at what that, particularly round about the centre of the picture there, you can just about see that he's set up a screen. Is that a telescope, isn't it? It's a sort of traditional sort of telescope that is set up in reverse to project the image of the sun onto that screen.
It's not in reverse, but because it's so bright,
it's
going through it, it's projecting it back, isn't it?
Projecting instead of looking through it.
You wouldn't be able to look through that,
which would be dangerous.
Obviously, because there's no filter on it. But
yeah, so he's projecting it onto that clipboard, and then there's a next picture which I think Tammy's going to show you now, and this is his result. And it shows you it's at 11 o'clock, which was when the peak was, wasn't it? When the most, because it was a partial eclipse of the sun. So that's brilliant. Peter, thank you very much for sharing that. Really good way of viewing it, because several people could look at that at the same time.
I think the pinhole camera is one of the things as well, isn't it? They teach at school.
Yes.
Which is a good way.
And talking of school and young people, we were doing the same thing here, and we were looking after Kevin's children, Kevan N4XL, Mac and Phoebe, and they were staying with us for 3 days. So Tammy set this all up in our garden, and there you can see some homemade filters. Tammy, you better talk about this through, I think. There's Mac in the foreground.
Yeah, he's got a pair of solar glasses on, so they're obviously bought ones. And then Phoebe's got the binoculars, which we made. You can buy solar paper, and you could just make filters. So we've got a filter on the camera, on the telescope, and on the binoculars, which are all homemade.
We can just see his camera just to the top of Mac's head, top right.
Yeah.
You can just see a normal SLR sort of camera where you've made something there. Can we have a look at... that's them looking through... That's Phoebe as well, looking through the telescope with that filter in front.
This is just a picture from the phone. I can't remember if that was through the binoculars, or... I think it was, wasn't it? Or was it through the... That might have just actually been through the solar spectacles. But it shows obviously the chunk that's been eaten out of the sun. And then this is one that was just through the eyepiece on the telescope with just a phone camera. Just shows.
Again, around 11 a.m.
That's a little bit after, I think, because it's or slightly before maybe, because it's not quite in line.
And that one I just took, I think that's the one I took with just my phone.
Yeah.
Looking down the eyepiece of your telescope.
Yep.
So you don't have to have lots of expensive, sophisticated equipment to do it. Well, still not as raw basics really as Peter's, but anyway, hope you enjoyed seeing those. So don't forget to let us know what you're doing. It just keeps us connected, and it doesn't have to be radio, as you can see from that. So anything that you think will be of interest to us, we would love you to let us know. Just drop it to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com. Keep in touch, please. As we always do at this time of our programme, we go to Tammy and ask for a little people.
Little people, yep. Little people as cameras this week.
Oh, is it?
It was a bit Halloween-y, although we're a little bit past that now. It's the Witch's Cauldron.
Aha. And of course they've used camera lenses to make it the cauldron, haven't they? Wonderful. Always ingenious and ingenuity that they use to do this. It's a Japanese website that has a new picture every day, and there it is. It's miniature-calendar.com if you want to have a look. But otherwise Tammy will pick one for us for every NARC Live. Thank you. So let's go to that competition. We showed you this last time we met on NARC Live, and we put it on our newsletters and on our website. And I have to confess, when I saw that, I just couldn't work out what it was. But what did you think?
Am I allowed to say I knew what it was straight away?
Yeah, you can do that if you like. And I didn't. And you'll see the irony of this as we develop. So, anybody, first just have a look. And
no,
anybody's noticed it online. Nobody's. Okay, so let's go through with our entries. That's puzzled everybody. I think this is going to be one of those, oh. Right, anyway. Bruce G4KZT says, is this what on earth object a car headlamp lens?
Stuart M0JKB, a bit of a long shot, but is this week's what on earth is it? A Klingon breast implant.
I deliberately didn't tell Tammy about that in advance because I thought you'd find that funny. Well, maybe, you never know. Bob G6PWS says, I'd say that the picture is of a rear lens, light lens for a vehicle. That bit is either the reversing section or indicator if supplied with a yellow bulb. It's only that I've just had to replace my rear lens after an argument with a low tree branch. Well, that's my version and I'm sticking to it, he says.
Paul G3VPT says, is it a computer mouse?
Oh, yes, I can see that. Yeah. Simon M0SIH says, I think the item shown on What on Earth Is This is a headlight or reversing light for a car.
Andy M0NKR said, this is a vehicle rear cluster, possibly for a Discovery 4.
And the answer is...
Oh, that's
us.
the wrong one, isn't it?
It is. You never
and
do
the
that.
answer is... It is.
It is a rear light cluster.
Rear light cluster. And we have that car that it came off and you didn't recognise it.
I know, that's the irony. This actually, though, I must say, came from Donard M0KRK. He sent that picture to us, the original picture, which was this. Can I press this button?
You can press that button, yep.
It is.
I actually turned that round last week just before we showed it because I thought it might make it a little more difficult.
But the irony is that this is my car. Oh, this actually a picture. We took a picture of my car this afternoon while it was still light just to show that. But I didn't recognise it. But Tammy did immediately. And some of you clearly did and some of you didn't. So it just shows you this sort of mystery object idea doesn't have to be obvious. Anyway, thank you very much, Donald, for sending that in. Have we got another competition tool for them? Now, this is a good one. Okay, so what on earth is this? Not saying anything. Are you?
I know what it is. I've seen the answer.
I know, we both do. That's right. Have a look at this, and do you know what that is? You may know immediately, but if not, I wouldn't have known. Use your ingenuity to work out what that strange object is, and we'll tell you in 2 weeks' time when we come back here on NARC Live. Send your answers to radio@dcpmicro.com by 3 o'clock on Wednesday week, please. Well, before we meet our guest for this evening, let's just go through what's happening at the club this week. On Sunday, we have the GB2RS News on GB3MB at 7 o'clock. On Monday night, at 7:30, we've got the Monday Night Net, also on GB3MB, and at 8:30, the 80-metre CW Net on 3.543 megahertz. Then next Wednesday, the 16th of November, we're meeting at the school again, back to our usual sixth form common room, and not just meeting as a social, although that's fine if that's what you want to do. We've put on a couple of things. Firstly, for our young members, we've got our first Bright Sparks in over 2 years. It's first since March 2020, actually. So we've got a couple of Bright Sparks who are still quite young, and they're keen to come to that. And it's with our new Bright Sparks leader, who's Simon M0SIH. So thank you very much to Simon for stepping up for this. And it'll be our first session for those young people. I think you'll all agree it's very important to encourage young people to get involved. And both, I can tell you actually, that both our our youngsters that I know are coming, and maybe there might be others as well, are both going in for their foundation course as well. So that's lovely. But that's what's happening. And also, though, for everybody else, we'll be running an informal Here's How workshop. And we've had a volunteer come forward to do this, and it's James, M0UKS. You may remember in these last 2 years or so of COVID, at various times we've visited his house, sometimes to look at his CCTV activity, but the other thing he loves to do is put up some rather amazing Christmas lights. And he has offered to run a workshop on show you how he does it, the Christmas lights, that is. So let me show you this firstly, if we can show this camera. You may have seen this at home. If you're into making stuff yourself, you may have seen something like this. I'll use this camera just to show you. You may have seen these sort of light strips before with LEDs. But the LEDs on this strip and many others are intelligent. They've got a chip in them, which means that you can serially address them. That doesn't mean anything to you. You'll find out more about it then. But in other words, each LED has some intelligence. It's got red, green and blue LEDs, but it can react and you can talk to it with using a computer. Now you can buy a set like this with these sorts of lights and a remote control and do it, but so much more you can do if you use either one of these, which is an Arduino that I happen to have, or one of these, which is a Raspberry Pi. And James will be showing you how he makes some of his amazing lighting effects that he's shown us on NARC Live before. Of course, many of you may be doing this as well. So if you've got something like this and you've got using these sort of colour light displays with Christmas just around the corner, please bring them to this. It's an informal workshop. It's not a talk with a projector and all that sort of thing. It's a getting around the table and having a chat about it and learning how James does his Christmas lights. And if you'd like to know and you've got no idea but it interests you as well, of course you'll be welcome too. So that's all at the club next week. We've got Bright Sparks. We've got a roundtable workshop with James all about Christmas lights, how he makes these Christmas lights, how he programs them to do some wonderful things. And also we've got an informal and social for anybody, for people who just want to just sit and have a chat. So I hope you'll see you at the club next week. And of course the other thing to tell you, oh dear, for the first time, we've done an awful lot since we last did a NARC Live.
Have you lost your card?
I can't see my card.
There.
Where is that?
Underneath that book there. Underneath the magazine.
Is it here?
There.
Oh, where? There it is, thanks. There we are, first time that's happened, I think. We have this card, a NARC card, which we're happy to send to anybody to celebrating a birthday. Maybe they're not well or whatever. If you would like us to send this to anybody, they don't have to be a radio amateur, they certainly don't have to be a member of the club. We will sign it, add your name to ours and send it. We usually send roughly one a week out and we're very happy to do that. The address to send your details to, the details of who you'd like to send the card to is at the bottom of the screen now, radio@dcpmicro.com. Oh, and also, Jim G3YLA has put a message on now to say there's a Morse boot camp at Roger G3LDI's on Saturday. Contact Roger if interested. Yes, indeed. I know we have been telling you about that through the Morse column, through the CW column that he writes every week for the newsletter. I didn't know if there was any spaces available. I wasn't aware of that. So if you're interested in attending a Morse boot camp, which is really an intensive course, but everybody I'm sure is welcome, then please contact either us using that address that you saw a moment ago, or contact Roger G3LDI directly. That's one of the reasons we were postponing the Koblenz Sked. And also, of course, we just want to hear about your stories and everything else that you, for the next time we meet in 2 weeks' time for NARC Live. But now on to our main event. And we're very, very pleased to welcome back, he's becoming an old friend of the club really, Kevan N4XL. And tonight he's going to talk to us about takeoff angles and HFTA, which means high frequency terrain assessment. I'd never heard of HFTA. But anyway, good evening to you, Kevan.
Good evening. Am I getting through okay?
You are getting through fine. We did have a few sound issues earlier. Hopefully you've heard of most of what we've been saying and that we weren't going to have any problems.
I think we'll be just fine. And I'd like to thank you and the club for having me back again and spend a little bit of time talking to you about high-frequency terrain analysis. And before we go off, I'd like to say this is something that most amateurs know a little bit about, takeoff angles. But this really opened my eyes when I began to dig into it a little bit. And I became a contester, and all these people were whooping me. And I wanted to figure out, what are they doing that I'm not? So I decided to start taking some topics off the reflector that they were talking about and dig into it and figure out what the heck they were so excited about these things for and why I'm not. And this is the first subject that I looked into. I knew about takeoff angles, but I just didn't understand how critical they are. And there's this program, high frequency terrain assessment, that we're going to take a look through, and we'll see how we can use the science to figure out how well your antenna works. So we've got a couple questions to start out with. Have you ever asked yourself, how high does my HF antenna really have to be to work well? And I understand over there in England, you have a bit more hoops to jump through to erect a tall antenna. But is the performance gained by erecting that antenna worth all the trouble of the permit application, spending lots of money, and of course you'll have more maintenance problems if you put things up higher in the air too. And the other thing that really surprised me is people here in the United States are actually using this program to analyze, is this house I want to be in a good HF location? And they won't buy their house unless this program tells them that it's going to work well. That's how significant this program has been to some amateurs around here, and how much is trusted. Seems like a little bit of magic at first, but it is well trusted. We're going to talk about the critical importance, not just what they are, but how critical it is to understand about takeoff angles, the HF communications. And then we'll talk about the program, HFTA, and determine its antenna effectiveness is what this thing is all about. One thing that disappoints some people is it's only for horizontally polarized antennas. Verticals just don't fit into this program. But the takeoff angle part of it still does apply. One thing I discovered, and I had this problem when I first started out too, is particularly newer hams have a little bit of trouble understanding the concepts of decibels in regards to antennas. And I kind of look at it as a way to easily relate power changes to antenna gain specifications. And most people have an intuitive understanding, like 100 watts is not as good as 400 watts or vice versa. And they have a fairly good understanding of what power is, but you start throwing decibels at people and they get a little bit confused. And I kind of made up this chart. Basically, if you double power, you get a 3 dB gain. If you have power, you get a 3 dB loss. And you can equate it. Going from 100 to 200 watts would be a 3 dB. Going from 200 to 400 is another doubling, so you get another 3 dB for a total of 6. And that's kind of a good rule of thumb to know when we start talking about some of the antenna gains and things that happen in this program. This is how a lot of us look at antennas. We look from the top down and we see this pattern, radiation pattern coming out of the antenna. And we've got these curves going around from the outer going to the inside here. And this is a minus 3 dB curve, minus 6. And that's what I mean. Some people, what does that really mean? But if you take and you look at it, so you had 200 watts going out, that minus 3 dB point is at those directions from where you're pointing. You have your power. And it gives you kind of a rule of thumb gut feel for what's happening. We had the look from the top, and for years and years and years, I thought that's what an antenna was like. But antennas actually have a 3D pattern that comes off of them. And this shows a Yagi up in the air. And the bright magenta and red is the stronger signals. And of course, as you turn it, you start seeing different patterns or whatnot. But the importance is it's not just a single pattern coming off an antenna. You get these different lobes that come off it. And by the same token, this is a vertical, and again, HFTA doesn't apply. But we're going to raise this antenna up, and you'll see as you raise an antenna up in the air, it changes the lobe patterns too. And not only that, we're starting out here with a gain of about 0.61 dB. And as I raise this antenna up, or the man who made this program did, you'll see this lobe pattern change. But then glance up here every now and then, you'll see that your gain coming off the antenna changes as well. So we'll let this run for a second or two. So you've got different lobes come off, and one of the main factors that controls that is how high the antenna is up in the air. And what I like to tell people around here is if your antenna is not working at, say, 50 feet, sometimes you might be able to lower it down a little bit and change that lobe pattern, and it may work for you. You don't always have to think about going up because you change those lobes. And again, this represents the strength of the signal. The farther it is out, the better. So height and directionality, multiple lobes. Here's a thing that come out of, I think this was out of one of the ARL books, and it shows from your transmitter, you get different radio waves going off, and it bounces up here into the ionosphere and comes down, and there's all kinds of them. But some people, as a refresher, the takeoff angle is just what is that angle that it's going in relation to the Earth. So that's what we're talking about with takeoff angles. There was a great DXer, low-band DXer, ON4UN, over there in Belgium, and he had this chart in his book that he put out. And what this shows is from Belgium, going to different parts of the world. These are the takeoff angles, and of course they'll change depending upon what frequency you have. That it typically comes in, if you're trying to work from Belgium to South America or South Africa, 1 to 18 degrees is the targets of the takeoff angles you want to work at. And most often it comes into Belgium, he has at 5 degrees. So that's where that comes into play. And here to the US, it's 2 to 33 degrees. And you can find this information in several places, including in HFTA, and it has it from Great Britain as well in the actual program. We'll talk about where you get that later. So different bands, different places in the world have all these different takeoff angles that you need to be concerned about to get reliable communications. Now that doesn't mean that you won't be able to communicate if you don't have an antenna that's key to these takeoff angles that you see there. It's just you're not going to be able to do it quite as reliably. And that's what we're shooting for with this program, is how reliable. A lot of people don't recognize this when they first start out as hams. The same antenna installed higher or lower or at a different location may give you significantly different performance. A lot of people, particularly new people, say, well, this antenna, everybody says it would do this, that, and the other. Well, it may for one ham, but you put it in their location, or if you have it at a different height, it may not work the same way. This comes out of the ERL books, the antenna books. And what it's showing is it says antenna height at an 1/8 wavelength high, 1/4 wavelength high, etc. You get these different lobes. That's what we talked about as it goes up in the air. And I use this when I talk to y'all about the 80-meter inverted L and low band decisions I made. 1/8 wavelength high for 80 meters is 33 feet. Go down to 10 meters, it's 1/8 of that. So you can kind of do the math and figure out how far up we're talking about. But as it changes, your lobe pattern changes. Most DX is going to be down here at these lower angles, and most closer in things for you would be like Europe. For us, it's here. Other places in the United States would be at the higher angles. That's just as a rule of thumb. To look at HFTA now, we've got the background out of the way. They have a little graph that they use to plot all their data on. And one axis is the takeoff angle that we're talking about, going from 0 in this case up to 25. And then they have the antenna gain that is relative to it over here on this axis. So somehow or other, we're going to have to convert these lobes and things that we saw to this type of format. So I took a close-up of what we just looked at a minute ago. And if you take and you rotate that on its side, there's the takeoff angles that lobe measures. So what we can do is measure the gain of the antenna at a particular takeoff angle. And then we can go ahead and plot that on the chart. Here's what we had there, and to equate this to a Yagi with multiple lobes, spin that on its side. And here you have the chart showing those lobes. So now we've got a plot showing how this particular antenna at that particular height works and what its gain is. Next thing is, how do we equate this to the takeoff angles? Well, there's this guy, the man who wrote this program, HFTA. His name's Dean Straw, N6BV. He did some work for the U.S. government, I understand, out in Hawaii, and he got in a helicopter, and he flew up in the air, and he measured all these takeoff angles coming off of the antennas and everything, and he knew there was reciprocity, and he measured some of the arrival angles from the faraway places. And he took that knowledge that he had from doing that work, and he put it into the ham community, and we're thankful he did. But what this shows us here is we still got the gain in the takeoff angle, but he added an elevation statistics. And what this is saying for this particular graph is that right here, 10% of the time, the signal is coming into us at a 7-degree takeoff angle. 2% of the time, it's coming in an 18-degree angle. So now we've got all the pieces of the puzzle, most of the pieces of the puzzle that we need. We throw all these things together, and it looks like this. Here is the gain of the antenna. Here's the percentage of times and how strong the signals are coming in at whatever takeoff angle they are. And the whole concept here is to try to get this peak, the highest gain of the antenna, over the greatest percentage of times that the angles are coming into us. And the better we are at making that happen, the more reliable our communications are going to be to our target area. Look up here on this part of it. This happens to be a 10-meter chart, and I can't see my writing up there. I think this says to Europe. Yep, it says to Europe. And this is looking at my location. I was analyzing my antenna. And when I started doing this, I was trying to figure out, should I put my antenna at 50 foot or should I put it at 70 foot? So I ran this. And this is for showing a flat terrain. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And what this figure of merit, FOM, that number that I have right here, figure of merit 10.1 is he did a weighted average of the gain at every single angle, and he figured all that out, and he says, I come up with a number that says this is worth 10.1. And what that really means isn't important, other than the higher that number is, the more better your antenna is. I hate that phrase. The better your antenna will be at providing reliable communications. The lower that number, your chances of having reliable communications are less. 10.1 is a reasonable type value. So this is how HFTA lays it out and shows what's going on for my location. Here, I changed it and I went to Asia. And where on the before, you remember we had all these, I'll switch back just a second. We have mostly a higher percentage takeoff angle going from me to Europe. But if I'm looking at Asia, I've really got to have some low angles. And that's a little hard to do here for me in my particular location. And my figure of merit reflects that accordingly. At 50 feet, it's only 8.8. It went down. So what I did, and we'll look at some of these other charts in a minute, is I went through this for every particular band I was interested in. And in this case, it was 10, 15, and 20. And I looked at all the major directions. Being a contester, I chose Europe and Japan as being critical to me. But I also looked at South America and Asia. And I did it for every single band. And I tried to come up with a way, excuse the phone in the background. My wife will pick it up in a second. I hope. Okay, good. And tried to come up with a particular, what is the best height for all these types of operations? And I ran chart after chart after chart of doing this. And that's the basic concept. Now, a lot of people, you kind of wonder, is 30 foot okay or is 70 foot okay? And as you would be expected, higher is better. And everybody tries to get an antenna up as high as they can. This is looking at Europe again. And obviously a 70-foot antenna, which is this red curve, does much better than an antenna at 30 feet does. However, here's a situation where I put one at 50, at 70, and the green is 180 feet, and everybody say higher is better. But you can see by these figures of merits, 180 and 70 feet, there's really no difference in the overall performance of the antenna if you're trying to figure out how does it work across all the different possible takeoff angles. A 70-foot antenna is just as good as a 180-foot antenna. And actually, in some cases, like right here, there's a 20 dB difference between an antenna at 70 foot and that one at 180 foot. So for this range of takeoff angles, which admittedly is pretty low, that antenna at 70 foot is going to do much better. Remember I said dBs are kind of nice to know to compare power. 10 dB is 1,000 watts. And if you double that going to 20 dB, you add 10 times that. So this is the equivalent, let's say, of this having 100 watts and the 70-foot antenna having 10,000 watts. Obviously, the 70-foot antenna is going to be a much stronger signal there. So it gives you an understanding a little bit of just what the magnitude of that difference is. And you can start comparing that way. It's not all that good then, necessarily, that higher is better. And in fact, if you looked at it objectively, that antenna at 50 foot going from about here to about here, that's within 2 dB of your antenna at 180 feet. So even that 50-foot antenna is going to work almost as well over that range of takeoff and arrival angles. Now, remember I mentioned Asia a little bit ago, I need low takeoff angles. Obviously, that 180-foot antenna will do better. But at 50 foot, it's still pretty good. You can be comfortable and happy with a lot of communications with an antenna at 50 foot. A lot of people, they hear about stacks and whatnot, and that's the advantage of what stacks do. Here I've got one at 70 foot. Here I've got one at 35 foot. But I can phase them, and they become additive, and they cover a much broader range of takeoff and arrival angles. That's one of the advantages of having a stack, and HFTA allows you to compare stacks as well. We'll look at the program in a minute or two. Now, all this has been over flat terrain, and this come out of the antenna book, and it shows here a signal coming off the antenna, hitting the ground and reflecting off and going up into the space. And it's good that it has one ray there, but there are actually rays coming off this antenna all kinds of different ways. And then these things bounce off the ground and they go up there and they combine up in the atmosphere and they interact with each other up there too. If you look down on top of an ocean scene and the wind and waves are coming in from the bottom right there, you get all this waves coming around. And I know that, what's that got to do with radio stuff? But physics is physics. And ocean waves and radio waves tend to work fairly similar. And if you look at these little projection points here, you can see the physics makes the wave kind of change direction and move, and they start interacting with each other. And every one of these points, that takes place. Off your antenna, the same thing happens with a hill or a valley or whatnot. Your radio will hit that, and it'll bounce and it'll change direction. So all the ground in your terrain around your antenna has a direct impact on how these radio waves hit, and then they go off and interact with each other later on. Here's what my terrain profile looks like going to Europe. And this kind of looks like I had a mountain between me and Europe, but look at this scale down here. 2,000 feet, 4,000 feet, 6,000 feet. This is 2 miles, and that's only going from 580 up to 630 feet. So I've got a 50-foot increase over 3,000 feet of ground distance. So that's not much of a mountain. You got to keep that thought in mind while you're looking at these things. But each one of these points is one of those diffraction points and locations. And they're all going to have issues and problems, or maybe even hopefully benefits, depending upon how they interact. And terrain up to 2 miles away can affect your signal to some form or another. Obviously, the closer in ones will have more of an effect, but 2 miles away is considered about that. Most people wouldn't think that that far away would have a difference, but it does. Here, HFTA allowed me to have a flat terrain, an antenna on flat terrain, which is the blue at 50 feet. But then when I put in the actual terrain I have real, those diffractions and things, actually, I was lucky. I didn't know any of this when I put my antenna up. Actually gives me a boost in my signal going to Europe. And that goes from about 12 dB, if I draw it straight down, to about 5 dB, 4.5. So I'm getting about a 7 dB, excuse me, increase just because of the real terrain that I have between me and Europe. And that's pretty significant, I think. And you have to take that in consideration as well, every one of your directions. Here's what my terrain looks like going to South Africa or South America. Rather than going up with that mountain we kind of mentioned, this kind of slopes down in general. And this is what it looks like with my antenna at 50 feet going to South America. I've got a pretty significant gain with my terrain going from a figure of merit of 9.6 to 12.6. And that all comes from being able to feed into this program what my terrain profile is around my house. And I can see I've got a pretty significant increase. Now, to back that up, I only run 100 watts in contests, and I am much stronger into South America than you would think 100 watts would be. There are people up in New England, I've looked them up before, who have 100-foot plus towers. They're running 4 or 5 element monobanders on top of it, and they're running a kilowatt or 1,500 watts of power. And it is not unusual for me to equal or beat them in the pileup into the Caribbean and South America. And that's all because of this increased gain I get because of the realness of the terrain around me, and the fact that I have one less hop than they do coming from New England. But even stations around here in my location that are similar and running a kilowatt or whatnot, I can oftentimes beat them out because they don't have the same sloping terrain that I do. So that's why people are using this type of analysis to figure out how high to put their antenna, what's the best height, higher, lower, will a stack help me, or is this a good place to put a house with the terrain around me? Here I have 3 of them looking at Europe, a 50-foot flat, which is the blue, a 50-foot red, and a 70-foot. Remember, I said I was trying to decide if I should put my antenna at 50 or 70 feet. And the figure of merits here tell me that, as would be expected, that 70-foot antenna would probably be a better way to go. I can't afford the monobanders. I've just got a tri-bander. So I thought to myself, is that going to hold up on all the other directions and all the other heights? So I went ahead and did all the analysis a little bit. And here I've got it looking at the United States, and it turns out if I'm doing a domestic contest or trying to work people here in the United States, there's not much difference at all between 50 or 70 feet. It's much easier for me to climb a tower, a 50-foot tower, than a 70-foot tower, and there's less maintenance and costs associated with it. So I liked what that was telling me. But still, that first one looking at Europe, that 70-foot antenna outperformed it. So I was still leaning towards going up to 70 feet. Then I took a look at what 10 megahertz or 10 meters does. And here you see there's a bit of a difference. Going into Europe, I have a better figure of merit with my antenna at the lower height of 50 feet than I do at 70 feet. And after running all these things, I decided I was just going to leave my antenna at 50 foot. The different heights and things, as I ran these calculations, for me personally, I figured it would be worthwhile if I could get an antenna up to 90 feet or higher, but and run some stacked antennas, one lower, one higher. But you're talking a significant chunk of change, and I'm retired, so I just settled down a 50-foot antenna, and I've been happy with that. I do fairly well. The program's easy to use, and by the way, I don't know if you can see my picture of me or not, but it just comes out of, that's not going to focus, comes out of the ARL antenna books, and any of them about the last 20 years or so have this program in it.
Actually, if you could, Kevin, sorry to interrupt, if you just hold that book up, but right in front of you, because it's because Zoom filters out, yeah, just in front of your face a bit, that's it, that's one, okay.
Does that look better anyway?
I think that's no comment. Thank you.
Anyway, uh, this program, it comes with the antenna books. I don't know where else you can get it. So you may have to purchase one of them if you're interested. And you can choose an antenna, a dipole, 2-element, 3-element. They go up to 8 elements. And you can put in the different heights that you want to do an analysis. And these are all going, that was my old call. These are all going 270 degrees, which is off towards Hawaii direction from where I am. And you can also, for those of you who do stacks and things, you can do this for in-phase and out-of-phase drive and feeding of them as well and look at your patterns associated with that. So it's pretty useful. You also don't have to have the same one. In fact, we're going to look at some of these a little later that are going 3 different directions, so you can look at what is the response of these antennas going in the different directions, all on the same graph as well. Here is where you put in the terrain profiles. You choose your band. Just type that in there. There are some options, whether it has diffraction, what is your ground conductivity and all. Well, that doesn't have a big effect on this. You can choose whether to plot 1, 2, or 3 different terrains and click that and it'll show you terrain plots. And then you put in what your elevation parameters are. It was broken down all the way to my state, South Carolina, going to Europe, and the same as it has G for Great Britain, coming out of Great Britain to the different places available on the disk as well. And then all you would do is hit compute, and then it spits out these nice little graphs that you can play with. There are some things that you need to think about, as I've hinted a little here. If you've got a multi-band antenna, you need to do it for a trap dipole. Do it for all the different heights, different directions. Don't just take the first thing you see. And if you can put up more than one antenna, see what combinations is best to cover the most angles. I try to do that on all my bands, have 2 different antennas to cover different takeoff angles. And I find myself switching back and forth between either a vertical and horizontal or a different height antenna to give me a different takeoff angle during the contest, and it really does make a difference. There's a website, Kilo 6 Tango Uniform, and he has free terrain downloads. He also has pay-for-use things. And there's VOA Cap, which is a prediction tool many of you DXers, contesters probably know about. You can actually integrate your specific setup and terrain profiles and antenna with the VOA Cap predictions to modify it and make it much more specific to your situation. Pretty useful. He charges a little bit. I don't think it's very much, but he charges some for that information. But it's available at the K6TU website, plus a lot more information about what's available and some little tips, tricks you can do with the program. There is a program called MicroDem, which was developed for the U.S. military, some of their military applications. And USGS is the U.S. Geological Service. It's pretty complicated to use MicroDem to generate terrain profiles. And I don't know if you'd be able to get the data to feed into it or not, but there is that program available out there as well. N6BV, he's the guy that wrote it, Dean Straw. He says the accuracy is only plus or minus 3 dB, so don't get obsessed over small differences in your plotted results. And that makes kind of sense. He also says verify your results by plotting 3 different heights right close to the same one, because there are some variances in the program. And I went and looked at a couple of my plots, and I found this one. And this shows an antenna at 69, 70, and 71 feet. 2 of them are tracking very well, but even though there's only like a foot difference, you can see the one that's 69 feet is a little bit radically different. So when you come up with something and doing this, run it at a couple feet up and down and make sure you're getting reliable data out of this thing. A lot of variables go into this program. The other thing about this is people want to know, well, we're just changing the sunspot cycles. Does this apply at the high spot or the low spot of the sunspot cycle? And I actually talked with Dean about this. We exchanged some information. And he's under the opinion, and since it's his program, he didn't want to change it, that if you're trying to serve people best, to put this information out on the takeoff angles and everything for the entire, what the more or less an average is over the entire 11-year time period. So he's never broken it out for the big high or low spots of the sunspot cycle. He says these are the data that he's found in all his experience that will give you the most reliable information. And I got to hand it to him. For most of us, we're not going to go out on our towers or in our trees and raise or lower the antenna up. At least most of us won't, based on whether it's the high spot or the low spot in the sunspot cycle. We're going to just leave it where it's at. So he's saying use this data for your information, develop your antenna system, and you've got the best compromise for the entire amount of time. It says to the degree to which the antenna is chosen for particular terrain cover all these angles, the more effective will be the antenna for the entire period of the sunspot cycle. He says use a little bit of caution with the figure of merit. It's only a snapshot. Very complex situation. And he says you can easily find times where if you look at a particular antenna, although they may have similar figures of merits or one looks much worse, he does acknowledge the sunspot cycle. He says that those lower sunspot cycles, the only elevation angles that are going to really work are going to be the low angles. So you may actually want to consider focusing more on low angle radiation and skewing some of your installation decisions based upon that. So he does give you a little bit of an out how to figure some of that out. He got this data originally from the shuttle radar topographic missions, and they bounced the radar down from space and they measured what the ground terrain was, but then they discovered that the radar was reflected by the tops of the trees, so it didn't necessarily tell you what was going on underneath the ground terrain cover. So if you do begin using this, take a look at where your source of data come from for your terrain profiles. And he says, of course, dipoles, they're bidirectional, but when HFTA plots it, it only goes in the forward direction. You'd have to run the same thing with the terrain profile going in the opposite direction to see what happens going the other way. This one wasn't necessarily a good thing for the group that I'm talking with here. Dean didn't come right out and say it isn't any good, but he kind of felt, I got the impression from him that when you get a terrain profile, all he could get initially for years was 30 feet between the plotted points. And he says that sometimes things plotted up in terrain features in between them terrain points that did have a significant effect. So he thought having 10-meter profiles was much better. But unfortunately, I could only find 30-meter websites on K6TU's website. This program was used for a long period of time at the 30-meter, and it gives you a trend, but it doesn't necessarily give you the hard decision-making things for like maybe spending thousands of pounds on a house would. You might want to get a little bit more. And what he used to do, and he says, admittedly, this is a lot of work, he would get a local topographical map, and he'd get out his ruler and his pencil, and he'd mark off the distances and measure what the terrain was at that point and generate his own terrain profiles individually. And that's not hard to do because the terrain profiles are really simple text files. You just put them in there and put what the distance is and what your height is, spaced a certain distance apart. And that's all there is to a terrain profile. Easy to do in the computer, but a little bit harder if you don't have one of these websites to convert it for you. And you may very well have some government information available over there in Great Britain that would allow you to generate a terrain profile like in the program MicroDem for particular angles. I don't know. I'll leave that for somebody over there if they care to make that effort. All right, we're going to take a look at a couple people, and I'm having a little bit of hard trouble seeing what they are, but Roger here, this is a terrain profile from his, and this was using 30-meter terrain plots that come out of there, and I think this was looking towards Europe. Again, forgive me if I misspeak here because I can't see the top of my screen right now. And when I ran this program, I wanted to know, does Roger need to have an antenna at 30 foot, 50 foot, or 70 foot? What works better for him into Europe? And this program says actually Roger's doing pretty good with just an antenna, and I just use dipoles here. Dipole at 30 feet getting into Europe. Doesn't really gain him a lot to go into 50 or 70 foot height. Although if he could, that might be a good thing to have, as we'll see in a minute or two. Here's his terrain profile to Europe. And this is the one he has to the United States, at least according to the K6TU website. And again, this isn't a mountain. You're only talking here 115 to 200 feet over 14,000 feet of ground distance. And you compare the two, there's quite a bit of difference between him looking at Europe and looking towards the United States. And this is what he gets for that. Here, his 30-foot dipole going to the United States only has a figure of merit of 0.8, or if he can get it up to 50 or 70 foot, he'll be doing much better getting into the U.S. And you can kind of overcome that a little bit by using a higher gain antenna than a dipole, but still, that's not very good getting into the United States at 30 feet. If I was him, I would be looking at some other options, which, since you all have got a lot of farmland around where you are there in NARC and whatnot, although I understand you've got a lot of people across the United Kingdom, but right there around this part of the location, a lot of farmland, you'll have very good ground conductivity. A vertical might be something I would look into quite a bit, even at the higher frequencies. It might do a little bit better if you could only get a dipole up 30 feet. I'd be looking at verticals. Here, this is looking towards 40 degrees, I think is Japan from you, 50 foot. I got 40, 130, and 295. So we're looking, the blue is what his real terrain is going at 50 foot towards Japan, and then also towards Europe and towards the U.S. Because I've got 3 different terrain profiles, I don't have the takeoff angles here. You'd have to run each one to get a figure of merit for what that was. So it's kind of interesting to look at that. Here, Chris is looking towards Europe. He's got a different, where Roger had one kind of going up like that at the beginning. His kind of slopes down a little bit more. And his figure of merit going into Europe at 30 foot is 5.6, considerably pretty good. 70 foot, his is 6.9. He might be worthwhile getting up to about 70 foot if he could. He'd be getting a much stronger signal into Europe in that particular case. And this is his terrain profile, I think, headed to the United States. And then as you look at this one, his 30-foot antenna wouldn't be doing any good at all, though. 50 or 70 foot would be doing better for him as well going into the U.S. And this is him looking at all 3 different directions, blue towards Japan, the red towards Europe, and the green towards the United States. This next one caught me by surprise when it popped up. I have never seen a curve flat like that. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. Phil, you caught me by surprise if you're watching this. And I thought, well, what did I look at? I downloaded the other 3 directions. Let's take a look at those. So I threw them on the screen. And this is kind of a jumbled up mess, but you can still see we still got that little hoop there. And I thought, what the heck is that? So I got on Google Earth and I took a look, and this is where I had his coordinates as being. And right down here at about 130 degrees headed towards Europe is a lake. And they couldn't evidently get the ground terrain profile in the lake. And we've kind of been taught, I'll digress here a minute, that lakes don't really have much of an effect on radio waves because they're fresh water. But we've got a lake here, Lake Greenwood, a little ways from us, and we've got 3 hams I know of live on it. And every single one of them get enhanced propagation off of that lake water. And I think that's probably because for years the industries around here dumped their chemicals and their wastewater into the river, and it flowed down here to the Lake Greenwood, which is actually a reservoir, and kind of settled out on the ground. And they do get enhancement from the fresh water. So I don't know if he's going to get any enhancement from that or not. There isn't much of a way to tell from that profile coming down how it would actually handle that. But I ran the thing anyway. And Phil, if we're looking towards Europe here, figure merit of 3.2, and it doesn't make much difference whether he goes 50 or 70 foot. He's got about the same figure of merit, even though it's higher here and whatnot. He comes across these angles, higher angles going into Europe because it's a closer distance, and his 50-foot antenna does much better at those higher angles. So he has something to consider there as well. And this is how it looks going off in the other directions towards Japan, Europe, and the green again is towards the United States. So each thing's a little bit different. Again, you can find this in the IRL books. K6TU is a nice thing. And we talked about being able to personalize your propagation predictions. In summary, how well an antenna plays depends on the takeoff angle to the target area, the antenna height, and the local terrain. Lower is sometimes better, and this program will let you know that. And more than one antenna per band will help your overall signal presence. And you should kind of try to design your antenna farm to cover all the angles. If you can't, then choose what's most important to you. Do you want to work more domestically into Europe? Are you happy and have a good time trying to work into Asia or the United States? And a lot of people think, well, this doesn't have any effect with FT8 and programs like that. And that's true. FT8 comes up with a lot of stuff. But I'm sure you people, I don't do digital, but I've heard a lot of them say, so-and-so beats me out all the time. I have a hard time getting through the pileup. The stronger you make your antenna play, whether you're on sideband, CW, digital, RIDI, whatever you are, the stronger your antenna is at the takeoff angle to your target area, the stronger you're going to be there, even for the same power. So the better if you can make your antenna farm, the better off you are. I wanted to close with two unexpected things as I've used this program over time. As I said, I don't have the resources to put up a 120-foot tower or multiple towers. So I did what I could with what I had here to work with. But I am far less frustrated knowing that I've done this analysis, and by the way, after thousands and thousands of contest contacts, I swear by this program too. I know that I've done as best as I can for what I'm willing to spend for my radio fund. And I no longer regret or wonder, should I, when I did this, spent that extra money and gone up to 70 foot or whatnot? I'm pretty confident that I've made the right decision for where I'm at. So I don't have that wonder and nag anymore. I'm happy with my station. And the second thing about this program that has given me is confidence. I mentioned about how I can beat out the big stations out of the New England when I'm pointing south. I know how my program or how my station works and how the antennas react. And I go into now, you contesters have probably heard this or understand it. If you sound like a big dog and you act like a big dog, you're probably a big dog. And I found that this gives me the confidence to realize that even though I don't have that tall tower and 1,000 watts, I got a good chance in many cases of busting that pile up because my ground terrain gives me a good takeoff angle, that particular location. And I sound like a big dog a lot, and I get through a lot, and my scores show it. So that's an unexpected boost for running this program as well. So it might be worthwhile playing around with a little bit for you. There are several different references, ARL antenna books, the operating instructions, some videos that I got off of YouTube a while back where they can be found, low band DXing by ON4UN, whatnot. And seeing the effects of local terrain on radiation patterns is good too. So with that, are there any questions?
Lovely, thanks, Kevin. I should get you have a quick drink or something like that, I should think, after that. Thank you ever so much. Yes, absolutely. For everybody at home now watching on BATC or Facebook, please ask your questions or make your comments. Maybe you've already used this program HFTA or got other experience. And we've got a few comments already, but we'd love some more. So please pop them on there now. One thing I've done, by the way, Kevin, whilst you were talking, is obviously the ARRL antenna book's not quite as readily available here, although I found that you can get it on Amazon. in the UK, although it's an import from Amazon US, so it takes a couple of weeks typically, and it costs just over £50. But I also looked on the RSGB website. Of course, they sort of partner with the ARRL on sharing books. It's a lot cheaper if you're an RSGB member. It's £42.49 for the latest antenna book, and for £49.99 for non-members, and I presume that's available immediately. So that's probably the cheapest source for it, and supporting the RSGB as well. I couldn't see a specific mention that it includes the software on it, though, because this is not readily available, this software, is it? It's not, as far as I could find it, apart from through that antennas book.
The antenna book is the only place I know that you can get it. And there is, in this case, a CD that it comes with and has it right on the CD. So it's mentioned in the antenna book itself.
Thanks.
And if you go to the RSGB site, perhaps it'll mention what's contained on it and what software programs. So I would guess it'd be in there.
Was that the 23rd edition that you've got there that I saw?
Yes, but I've got it all the way, I think, back to the 21st or 20th edition as well.
The only reason I ask is because we don't want to deceive anybody, because it's quite a lot of money for a book. And the ones that I see listed on the RSGB and also on Amazon mainly are the 24th edition, which I guess is the latest. So all I just sort of say to our members and any viewers and anybody watching, just be careful and just make sure before you order this book. We don't want to be responsible for you ordering it and it's not there. I just couldn't see a mention that the CD was included on the 24th edition, which is the current version available. So it's just worth checking whoever you supplier that you want to use. But it looks like an excellent program, and written quite some time ago from what I could see by Dean N6BV.
Yes.
So it does look good. Okay, I mean, Ray G3XLG has just said it is in the 23rd edition. But again, I just wanted to make clear that the one that I think is the current or the latest edition and available on those sites is the 24th. So just make sure with whoever you decide to order it from that it's going to have the CD with that software inside it. It may even be a link to a download or something like that, but just be sure before you spend £50. Anyway, round to some questions and some comments. Chris Danby, G0, I'm just having a look here. We sent us several different programs here. Yeah, Chris, who I think you used some of his DWV, sorry, G0 DWV, who you mentioned some of his plots there. He says, if I could work out how to attach a file, I'd share my current HFTA file for JA, for Japan, I guess.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes. Can you see us and hear us?
I can hear you, but we're having some stutters on my end again.
Okay, sorry.
I apologize for that.
No, we can hear you fine.
If there's a file there that he'd care to send, that'd be fine. I can throw it in there.
Okay.
But anybody else share it with him too?
Yep, thank you. Chris mentions that it's in one of the CDs on one of the ARRL handbook, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It looks like the copyright is with the ARRL. So again, just for everybody at home watching, I don't want you to go and spend £50 and then it's not there. Just be sure before you buy whatever book it is that if you're buying it, particularly for this software, make sure it's there. Beg your pardon,
David,
Kevin?
one thing I will mention is the K6TU website. You can download any person's location by typing it in there, and it doesn't cost you a thing to get a 360-degree profiles for every degree of the circle, so you can get them that way too.
And that was K6T
Tango Uniform.
K6 Tango Uniform website, so have a look at that as well. Okay, back to some of these questions now. Stuart M0JKB says, David, you may want to tell Kevin that the Norfolk Broads are significantly different to American Broads. I'm not sure. Oh, I see what he's saying now. I only just got that. Yeah.
All right.
Our Norfolk Broads in this area, this particular part of the country where you're broadcasting to for our club, you see, are sort of waterways and things, which are kind of tidal, but they're still considered as inland waterways. We've got a lot of these Norfolk Broads, but yeah, I've just got what he means.
I understand. Yeah.
Let's move on then, shall we? Tony M0TDK says, in calculating ground terrain profiles, how far from the station do you need to look?
They say the terrain profile affects it up to 2 miles from your site. Practically, if it's fairly flat out beyond that, I don't think it'd have any real effect, but 2 miles is what they recommend.
Okay, thank you. Jim G3YLA says, super interesting talk, Kevan. Thank you. Does this technique assume a fixed height for the F2 layer, or would you need different calculations for various times of day?
You're not going to be able to get it. That's part of what Dean's comment was, that his charts for the takeoff angles and everything cover the entire period, and that is a all-inclusive angle thing. Will it be different? The answer is yes, it will. But he's setting the system up for as simple as he can without trying to fine-tune it for everything. Now, having said that, if you get into the K6TU website, upload your own profile, and you're doing the propagation predictions that are available on his website, it takes into account what is the time of day and what are the layers in regards to your location.
Okay, thank you. I was just a little bit interrupted there because Chris has sent me a message saying, could I check my email? And I've got a picture from a plot, and we're just trying to work out if we could possibly get it on here to share with you. It's not quite as easy as it sounds, Chris, because we have a playlist that we generate before the program starts, but we're going to try and do it now. Tammy's going to try and work out a way of doing it. Meantime, just a reminder to everybody again, if you'd like to make a comment or a question for Kevan, now is the time to do it, really, because otherwise we're getting towards the end of the program. Paul Gunther has said that I've got the 21st edition of the ARRL antenna handbook, and the disc is on that. So, of course, that's another possibility, maybe finding an older version of that program.
That's what I did. I started using this, I think, in the 21st or the 20th or maybe even the 19th edition. It just happened that this was the one I pulled off the shelf to work these graphs with. Okay. It works the same.
Lovely, thank you. Tammy's busy behind the scenes now, just trying to get this picture, plot that Chris has sent me over, and we're going to be able to show it to you in just a moment, I think. Here we go. So that's a plot that Chris has just sent to me. It's not maybe crystal clear. Is it? Can you see that okay?
I can see it fine, yes. I think that's great that he's using the program.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So it's a very useful...
Is there anything in particular you wanted me to comment on, or?
I don't know, to be honest, because he sent that to me. So I don't know.
Oh, he's running stacks and 105 feet. No wonder he's looking so much stronger than mine.
Yeah, he does.
I use the dipole.
He is renowned for one of our bigger stations, yeah. Shall we say. Chris, if you want to make a comment or anything for us to pass that on to Kevan, or ask a question of him while we've got that on the screen, please enter it now immediately on Facebook or on BATC, and we'll read that to question. Oh, Chris has said low angle to JA is difficult to cover.
Yep, you need high antennas for that. I'm jealous, Chris.
don't tell him he needs any bigger antennas, for goodness sake. He covers a lot of his area, I'm sure, anyway. But okay, thank you for sending that over, Chris. I hope that's okay on there. So, any other questions or comments at all? Have we got any, Tammy, from here? It's a fascinating program, though, isn't it? Is there anything else, any other programs that would do it? Because one of the little comments I saw is that it's written quite a long time ago, and it doesn't always run on the new 64-bit type operating systems.
Well, I have Windows 10 64-bit, and it runs fine.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm just looking at, say, while your talk was going on, I thought I'd find out from people how easy it is for them to get hold of the program. It's good of you as well to cover the plots from Roger, Chris, and Phil as well in your session there. Any other tips, really, Kevan, on about making the most of the antenna? Obviously, everybody's living in a different place. Some people have got very, very limited gardens. That's where you mentioned, I think, verticals, especially if you were near a load of water, because presumably the ground effect around can help you get a better lift-off.
If I thought about that particular question before I had this talk, and that's what prompted me to mention verticals during this time frame. The biggest advantage I can see is for what I perceive as the average person, and admittedly I'm fairly ignorant of what life in Great Britain is like, is if you are looking at moving, perhaps run this program and maybe to a retirement home or something, and just see if that will work out for you. The second thing is if you are perhaps into emergency communications, we do that here in the States sometime, is we're able to push that aspect of it when we're trying to get permits. For example, our county ordinance for antennas didn't mention ham radio antennas at all. They were saying CB antennas and other things can't be higher than 30 feet. And I was sat in a county council meeting, and I managed to slip in a 130-foot tower restriction before you have to get special permitting. So if you can stress that, perhaps it will help you get a permit for general use. I don't know how that works for you. But as far as your average type of indication, that's also why I said about the satisfaction. If you run this program and you get a chance to see where you're at and compare it to other people around you, I've really got what's considered a little pistol station for contesting, but many times because I ran these programs, I feel like a big dog and feel quite capable of busting a pile up, where before I would have just gave up and said, there's no way I can compete with those people. And it's increased my appreciation of the hobby after running this data and looking at what my particular situation is. Of course, conversely, it may have put me in a depression if I ran it the other way too. But
well, no, it'd certainly be really good, and I guess it could also apply if you're going to go and do, some kind of field event or a de-expedition or something like that as well. That you can find out a plot and get an idea of what sort of antenna you should take.
Exactly.
Chris again, G0DWV says everyone should try to plot their QTH because it's really simple as it makes you think. And just on that compatibility, Mike says, Mike G8EY says, I believe HFTA is 32-bit only, and will not run on 64-bit Windows, but you've said that you've run it all right on yours. And also Chris G0DWV says it runs fine on his Windows 10 64-bit as well. So it does seem to be compatible. And I did note that the latest version I think that's available is 1.04, so maybe that's got something to do with it. It was tweaked or something like that. Correct. But that's all the questions and comments that we've got. Kevin, it's been lovely to meet you again and to see you again, and another wonderful talk about another wonderful tool that we can use to try and make the most of our hobby. So once again, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you again, I'm sure, in a future talk as well.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, y'all.
Thank you, and you. Thanks very much, Kevin. There we are. That's Kevan N4XL, and we're really grateful to him for his presentation tonight. And just to remind you again, that NFTA software is available. It's ARRL copyright, and you can buy that as part of a book, but just check before you buy the antenna book and make sure that it's going to include that CD with the software on. That's almost it for this NARC Live. Just to let you know what's happening again at the club this week. On Sunday we have that GB2RS news on the repeater GB3MB. Also on the repeater on Monday night, 7:30, we've got the Monday Night Net. And at 8:30, the 80-metre CW net on 3.543 megahertz. And then next Wednesday, we won't be here online. We'll be meeting for in-person, at the school on Wednesday, the 16th of November, in our usual sixth form common room, of course. And there's the Here's How to make Christmas lights and Christmas decorations and everything and program them yourself. So if you're into a bit of electronics and want to try and do some of that, that's going to be fascinating with James. Bright Sparks for our younger members, and of course, social informal as well. And also, of course, though, we'll see you back here in 2 weeks' time for NARC Live, when we've got a talk on the design and operation of the Titanic's radio, which is a pinnacle of spark technology. That's going to be presented to us by Fred, VE1FA. So we look forward to seeing you then. Don't forget to keep us coming with your news, keep sending in your news and things like that to keep everybody connected. And also, if you've got any mystery objects, that the sort that you've seen, they don't have to be completely bizarre and weird. As you can see, just the rear headlight got a lot of people foxed. Don't forget to try and send us some of those as well, because we love to carry on with that competition, and the NARC card, of course, as well. But that's it for this NARC Live. So from Tammy M0TC,
bye-bye,
and from me, David G7ERP, take care, look after yourselves and look after each other. Bye-bye.